Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Total Survey Design Podcast. My name is Azdren. In this episode, I go through the process of creating a survey from scratch. I want to share with you what the messy process looks like from my end, so you can see how I approach creating a survey. And the survey that I'm creating for this episode is the feedback survey for this very podcast. I would like to collect feedback from you, the listeners, so that I can tailor this podcast to your listening needs. And I really do want to receive your feedback. So before we begin, I want to ask that when you're done listening to this episode, please visit the show notes to take the short survey. Your feedback will help shape the future of this podcast. The URL to visit the survey is tinyurl.com/totalsurveydesign. Again, the URL is in the show notes. I'm going to leave the survey up, but I just want to say that if you want your feedback to count, you should really take the survey as soon as possible because I want to be able to have enough time to implement your feedback. The first thing that I do with any survey is that I write down the goals of the survey. So for this survey, it is kind of twofold. First, I want to tailor this podcast to better fit your listening needs. But I also want to reach a bigger audience. I'm hoping that with this feedback, I can accomplish both of these goals. I also want to learn who my listeners are. Are you a student or a small business owner, or just curious about surveys and learning, a professional survey methodologist, or something else? And I want to know how my podcast is being used, which goes with learning about who you are. I also want to know when my listeners are listening. Are people listening on their morning commute or morning run? Furthermore, I'm curious if there are episodes in this podcast that are being assigned in the classroom. I can see some clusters sometimes of listeners around the world, and it makes me think maybe it's some professor talking about something like survey weighting and sharing the podcast as supplemental material. I also want to know what kind of content listeners enjoy most. Is it the interviews, or is it the lecture-style episodes? Do you want more scripted episodes or more conversational ones? Or do you want to see more of those episodes where I'm bashing the surveys of big companies? I really don't know what people like. I don't have the superpower of reading your minds. So this way, hopefully, I can get a better understanding of what you want to see. Also, it might be helpful to know what platform you listen on. Does Spotify work? Or would you like to see content on YouTube or TikTok? I don't make YouTube content at the moment, but if that's something that most people want, I can do that. And what about the length of the episode? What is the ideal length? Or maybe you don't have a preference. But if, say, 90% of you prefer 5-minute episodes, I wouldn't mind making 5-minute episodes. Or maybe you guys like longer episodes. So I would like to know. I also want to ask about anything I might not have thought about. So I will ask an open-ended question where you could leave any other comments or suggestions. So let's get to designing the survey itself. I'm going to start with a simple introduction. I'm going to be respectful and have a conversation with my listeners, highlighting any benefits and reducing any potential costs. Again, this is all just the first things that come to mind. I will revise this text again in the future drafts, but the goal is to get a first draft down. So I might write something like an introduction that says, "Thank you for taking the time to share your views on the Total Survey Design Podcast. My name is Azdren, and I am the creator and the host of this podcast. Your feedback will help me better cater this podcast to your listening preferences. This survey should not take more than a couple of minutes. Your data will be aggregated, ensuring the highest level of confidentiality possible. For any questions, please write me at totalsurveydesign@gmail.com. Please click continue to proceed with the survey." The next thing I'm going to do is to turn my laundry list of wants into a series of questions. So, looking back at my wish list, the first one is, I want to learn who my listeners are. Are you a student or a small business owner? Just curious about surveys and learning? A professional survey methodologist, or something else? So, asking a respondent directly, that question might look something like this. First, we would like to know a bit about who our listeners are. What is your profession? Please select all that apply, and then I have options. High school student, college student, graduate student, postdoc, professor, academic scientist, industry or private sector, government employee, unemployed, retired, or other. And again, I want to emphasize that this is just the first draft. It looks bad, I could already tell myself. It's meant to be bad. It is just the first draft after all. But that's what it's like to create a survey. The next part I wrote that I want to know about how my podcast is being used, which goes with learning about who the listeners are. So I'm going to write the first thing that comes to my mind. How do you use this podcast? Please select all that apply. And here are the options. I use this podcast to learn about survey methods. I share this podcast with my students. I use this podcast to refresh what I already know about survey methods. Or how else do you use this podcast? ? It's fine. I'll edit it later and pre-test this survey before launching. Next, I want to know when my listeners are listening. Are people listening in the morning, or in the commute, or on morning run? But then I ask myself how I plan on using this data. And honestly, I think it's too abstract to even do anything about it. So to reduce the burden to respondents, I'm not going to ask about this. Next, I want to know if the podcast is being assigned in the classroom. But this question is pretty much being covered by the previously created question. So no need to ask that same question twice. Then I also want to know what kind of content listeners enjoy the most. Is it the interviews or is it the lecture style episodes? If they want more scripted episodes or conversational ones, and so on. So for this question, it might look something like this. What kind of content do you like? Please select all that apply, with the question STEM options. Interviews, lecture style scripted episodes, conversational stream of thought episodes, critiques of big company surveys, critiques of user submitted content, listener feedback, other. So moving on, I noted that I also want to know if people prefer to see content on some other platforms. So I'll ask, which platform do you prefer to see total survey design content on? ? Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, YouTube Video, TikTok, or something else. And the next question seeks to learn about the podcast length preference. So for this, I'm going to ask a slider question asking about how many minutes long would be the ideal length of a podcast episode. 5 minutes, and then all the way up to an hour. I also want to get a sense of how big of a listener someone is. So maybe I can ask something like, how many episodes have you listened to? And then the options are, I've listened to every single episode. I've listened to at least one episode, but not every single one. And I have not listened to any episodes. And for someone that has not listened to any episodes, I can filter out their responses and ask what they want to get out of this podcast. As I said in my wish list, I'm going to ask an open-ended question. Is there anything else you would like to say? And I'll have like a essay-style dialogue box there where people could write in their answers. I'm also curious to learn some basic demographic questions. So I'm going to ask, how old are you? Less than 18 years old? 18 to 24 years old? 25 to 45? Or 46 or older? Okay, I'm done with the draft of my questionnaire. But I realized in writing the questionnaire, I also want to know how familiar listeners are with survey design and methodology. So I'm adding a question that asks, how familiar are you with survey methodology? Completely a newcomer. Some familiarity or amateur. I'm somewhat proficient. Or I'm an expert. After I've completed a draft questionnaire, the next step for me typically is that I begin rearranging the questions. I want to lead with the most important or most interesting questions first. Just to give you a peek, I think the most important question is probably the question asking what kind of content listeners like to listen to. But then I realized that even more fundamental of a question is whether a listener is satisfied or dissatisfied with the podcast. After rearranging the questions, I'm going to ask whether each question serves the purpose of my original goal and whether the remaining questions are actionable. In other words, it doesn't make sense to leave a question which isn't going to be used to actually improve the podcast and help me reach more listeners. So, for example, I'm going to leave the last question about familiarity about survey methodology because it will help me guide how advanced or complex the content might be. Yet, when thinking about the age question, I realize now that I probably will not use that information in any meaningful way. So, I will probably remove that question. Next, I will go through each question and refine each question in question stem, ensuring that they are not biased or leading in any way, that they are clear and grammatically correct, and that the question and question stem options are working together. Then I will begin pretesting. First, I will take the survey several times myself. If the survey had any built-in skip logic programmed, I would make sure to take the survey with each iteration of each questions used in the skip logic. I will take the survey on my desktop and on my phone. Next, I will send out a draft questionnaire to one or two pretesters. It will probably be Sunny up and to my wife, then conduct an impromptu cognitive interviews with them to determine if there were any confusing questions, or if the survey works as expected, or if they have any thoughts or comments about the survey. So now, fast forwarding several days, I already got some preliminary feedback from some listeners, people who I know that listen to the podcast. Looking at the data from the first dozen or so responses, I then adjust the phrasing of some of the questions, especially the open-ended ones, because I really want to get some better data. I also look for how long the survey takes on average and adjust the reintroduction to the survey to reflect the tested survey times. And throughout this pre-testing phase, I may make significant changes to the survey. I may completely reword or redesign some questions. I may add new ones. You will see the final outcome of the questionnaire when I share it with you. And through this process, I hope that a relatively polished questionnaire will be the outcome. Except the questionnaire is just one part of the survey. Another part of the survey is figuring out how to get the questionnaire to the intended respondents. If I plan on only gathering data for my listeners, then I know my target audience are my listeners. But I might consider also creating a survey that is targeted to people who are not currently my listeners. If I decide to go that route, I might want to move up the questions on the number of episodes listened to, so that if somebody says that they have never listened to an episode of the podcast, I can branch out the survey and ask them more tailored questions. But I think I'm going to stick to only my listeners this time around. So the best way for me to reach my listeners is through the podcast itself. I don't have a single email list of people who are subscribed to my podcast, so the next best thing I could do is create a podcast episode dedicated to collect user feedback and direct listeners to the survey. And I guess that can be this episode. So please, pretty please, do me a favor. Since you've listened this far and seem to be interested in this topic, I want to ask for your help to improve the podcast. If you're listening on your phone, please go to the show notes and click on the survey link. If the link does not work, or if you cannot see the show notes, please open a browser at the moment and just type in tinyurl.com/total survey design. No, seriously, I'll wait a few seconds. Please do that. The link once again is tinyurl.com. That's tinyurl.com/total survey design, all is one word. This survey should only take a few minutes to complete unless you have a very long comment to write, at which point it is up to you as to how long it takes. But taking this survey is also an opportunity to see the final product and what I worked on and talked about throughout this episode. It is a chance to get a peek into my working process and how the survey might have changed after pre-testing. Remember, the goal of the survey is to improve this podcast for you and to bring you better content and hopefully reach a broader audience. I really appreciate taking your time to give your feedback. This podcast takes a lot of work, and I just want to make sure that my time is used more efficiently. Okay, are you taking this survey yet? You haven't started? Oh, you're waiting for me to finish this podcast? Okay, good. Go, you do the survey, and I will talk to you all in the next episode. Bye, everyone. Thank you and much appreciated, and hope to talk to you soon.